Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Julia and I'm a experienced counselor and a survivor of the twin flame cult. And on this channel I blend psychology, spirituality, and relationship education to talk about narcissistic abuse, cults, and spiritual awakening. So today I want to talk about a fairly foundational topic, and that is this idea of the narcissistic relationship as being like a cult of one. Now, I'm certainly not in any way the first person to suggest this. In fact, the way I found out about it, apart from personal lived experience, was looking on YouTube mostly, but other resources as well. And I think one of the main people that talks about this on YouTube is Richard Grannon. If you've heard of him, he's quite big in the narcissistic space online. And he basically talks about this in his book as well. He wrote a book by the same title, Cult of One, where I think he talks about the definition of a cult of one and his own personal experience. So I just want to break it down because, if you've looked at any of my other videos, you might be a bit confused as to why I'm talking about narcissistic abuse in the same breath as cults. But, it's very, I think, important to note that there's a lot of similarities. It's basically the same structure. It's just with one person instead of a group. So I think one of the main similarities between the cult of one and the group cult is that the narcissist in the cult of one is basically the same as the cult leader. They're the one in control. They're the one who's using a variety of manipulative tactics to keep their partner, usually if it's a romantic relationship, in check, so that they can, control them and have power over them and ultimately get narcissistic supply, and it makes them look good and all that sort of stuff. So, in terms of how the cult of one operates in the same way as an actual group cult, it's the same stages. So, if you've been involved in a narcissistic relationship, especially a romantic one, you'll know that it starts off with intense love bombing. You're put on a pedestal. There's lots of future faking, as in, telling you what you want to hear in terms of the beautiful, wonderful future that you're going to have together. And this is the same in a group cult as well. People join cults and the ideology sort of promises something like an amazing future together, as a group, or in more new age spiritual cults, there's often some sort of ideology around, we're ascending into the 4D or we're ascending into the 5D, and together we're going to ascend and into this beautiful harmonious future and bring the planet with us and rise the vibration of the planet just with our work and our unconditional love. And you might see me rolling my eyes a bit because obviously that's a load of bollocks, and that's very much what was promised in the twin flame cult that I managed to escape out of. And I'm no doubt that perhaps some of you listening may or have had an experience with the twin flame ideology or having been in the actual cult. So, it's very similar in that regard. There's the intense love bombing, you feel like you're part of something. But along with that, then, also comes a variety of manipulation tactics. Like gaslighting, that's a really big one. Denying your version of events, which is very much part of the gaslighting thing. Things like psychological projection. That's very big in the cult of one. If you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, they tend to project a lot of their own baggage, emotional bullshit, so to speak, if I'm allowed to say that word, onto their partner. They do things like, sort of set you up to fail. They triangulate you with other people. So I think that's incredibly big in the cult of one, as in the narcissistic relationship. And that same sort of thing goes on in cults big time as well. And I guess, as an example, in the twin flame cult, I think one of the biggest things was, and I've talked about this before, that, somehow if you do something, if your twin flame reacts to you in a certain way, it's because they're mirroring the darkest aspects of you, and that it's a sign that you need to do your work, and that there's insufficiency and lack in you that they're just mirroring to you. Of course, it's got nothing to do with them and the fact that, they're an abusive person, most likely. It's got everything to do with your unhealed wounds. So, that's sort of a massive gaslighting projection example. And there are many others in many different cults, and I'm sure if you've read up on cults, you'll have a couple of examples yourself. And I think another big one in the cult of one and in the formal cult as well is this sort of isolating you from family and friends. I think that's a really, really big one, obviously in both scenarios because they're identical. And, it might be that perhaps your narcissistic partner starts talking about your closest contacts, your family and your friends, in really negative terms, and suggests that they're having a really bad influence on you, and that you need to move away from them. Or they might encourage you to move to another city with them or another country, and then gradually they cut off contact with other people because it's just about you and them and how special your bond is. That's another way that narcissists, in both the one-on-one scenario and the cult scenario, operate. Kind of like suggesting that you're so special and that you've got such a unique and amazing bond together that you need to separate from other people in order to really honor and preserve that and keep that intact. That other people are just a bad influence and they're possibly going to ruin your beautiful union together. And so you see my rolling my eyes again. And so, you can see that that's a really big tactic to essentially alienate you from your most precious supports. And then, once you're alienated, you're a lot more vulnerable and open to suggestion. And that's exactly what they do in both scenarios. And just a little side note, I should have mentioned this before. As you probably know, most cult leaders are actually narcissists. In fact, 99.9% of them probably, because, it fits very well with their agenda in terms of having power and control and all of that stuff that happens in a one-to-one narcissistic cult of one. And, so it's one and the same, essentially. It's just, as we keep saying, one's on a macro scale and one's on a micro one-to-one scale. And I think another huge thing that cult leaders and narcissistic mini cult leaders, so to speak, tend to do is, they encourage and create dependency. They're the only one who can give you what you need. They're the only one that, is able to provide for you, practically speaking, and maybe emotionally as well. So, not only are they alienating you from family and friends, but they're creating this illusion that they're the only person that can fulfill all of your possible needs, in every possible way. And that's exactly where they want you. And that's very dangerous at the end of the day, because as a human being, you need several supports. You need a healthy support system. You can't rely on one person, especially someone who doesn't have your best intention in mind. Someone who is ultimately a very dangerous person in every possible way. So that's a really big one. And then another one that happens in both cult of one and, a regular group cult is the sort of us versus them mentality. So, you've probably sort of seen this quite commonly happen in group cults where the group leader or, the group ideology is that we're a special group of people. We are, contributing, and we are working towards one common goal, which, in a lot of New Age cults, as we know, is mostly about ascending to 5D or creating a beautiful future together and healing all of the wounds of the planet. And so the us versus them mentality sort of almost encourages this sort of elitist kind of thinking, which is, we're better than everybody else. We've got a special mission. We're an elite group of people. And if you leave us, then you're not one of us anymore. You're just one of the common folk. You're lesser than, you're a betrayer. And so that's a very sort of black and white kind of way to think about things, to characterize, being in the group versus not being in the group. It's very damaging. In a healthy sort of situation, if you decide at any point that you no longer resonate with what's going on and, you kind of want to pursue something else, you want to leave, that's respected. I mean, people in the group might be sad, but they don't demonize you for it. And you're suddenly the worst person in the world and you're going against us and all those sort of things. And the same happens, obviously, in the cult of one, the narcissistic relationship. Because if you decide to leave and you leave the narcissist, oh my gosh, that's it. You are the worst person alive. They're going to smear you to everybody, tell everybody what a terrible person you are, completely shift the narrative around so that you're the villain and they're the victim and all that kind of stuff. It's probably actually even sort of more violent or virulent, so to speak. Is that a word? Yes. Than in, the group cult. Although, no, I probably take that back, actually. They're probably just as bad as each other, because I'm just thinking about, various famous people that have spoken out after leaving, say, Scientology or Nexium or any of those kind of big cult groups. And, they've absolutely been slaughtered by the cult. They've been outcasted and told, everyone's told what a terrible demon person that they are for leaving. And, they're the villain and they never had good intentions and, what a terrible person they are. So it's all one and the same. It's all one and the same. And sometimes it's hard to sort of wrap your head around that, the fact that being in a narcissistic relationship, aka cult of one, and being in a actual group setting, it's the absolute same dynamics, just on a bigger scale. It plays out maybe slightly differently, because obviously the context of a romantic relationship has sort of its own unique signature, so to speak. It has its own unique kind of context and situations. But yeah, the dynamic is essentially the same. So I really wanted to just talk about this a bit more in length because I've changed my channel structure a little bit as well. So now I have a more formal posting structure. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I post videos. So Tuesdays, I post videos about cult dynamics and narcissistic relationships. And then on Thursdays, I talk about spiritual awakening and, integrating and deprogramming after you've come out of all those experiences. So my goal is really to tie everything together because I've just noticed that there's a huge pattern between these things, that a lot of people have these unique experiences where they end up in a narcissistic relationship or a cult relationship, cult group, and then they come out of that, or they have a spiritual awakening while they're still in that, and it's all kind of tied in together, and that was certainly my experience, and I'll make another video at some point talking about my experience a bit more in depth. But, I just recognize as well that not everybody is interested in all the topics that I talk about. So I wanted to give an option. If you're more interested in hearing about narcissistic relationships and cult dynamics, then tune in on Tuesdays. And then if you're more interested in topics to do with, the aftermath of all of that, as in the spiritual awakening, and topics to do with that and integration and all of those things, then tune in on Thursdays. So that's it for today. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're having a wonderful holiday period. I hope you have a lovely New Year's Eve, depending where you are on the planet. I'm here in Australia and it's the 30th, so not quite New Year's Eve yet, just in the run up to that. So wherever you are, I wish you a very, very happy New Year's, whatever you end up doing, and I will talk to you again very soon.